No one noticed when the man arrived. That was the first sign. He stood at the edge of a narrow street, stone buildings leaning inward like they were listening. The air smelled of iron and rain. Somewhere nearby, a bell rang, slow, deliberate, marking an hour that didn't belong to him. He closed his eyes and breathed. Day 18, he thought. Not out of hope, out of habit. He had learned long ago not to look surprised when the world rearranged itself around him. Not to panic when language sounded familiar but wrong. Not to ask what year it was. Those questions always came later. For now, he focused on the simple things, the weight of his coat, the ache behind his left eye, the faint trembling in his hands. The symptoms never lied. He walked. People passed him, merchants, laborers, women wrapped in shawls too thin for the cold. Their faces slid past his own like reflections in disturbed water. None of them stopped. None of them stared. They never did on the first day. At a corner, he paused and pressed his palm against the brick wall of the building, grounding himself. The surface was rough, chipped by time. Real. That mattered. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper, edges worn soft. 3 lines were written on it, in his own handwriting. Do not stay past the 20th. Do not interfere. Leave something behind. He had written those rules for himself years ago. Maybe decades. He no longer remembered which version of him had decided they were necessary. A woman selling bread caught his eye. She was younger than he expected. Dark hair pulled back carelessly. There was flour on her hands, smudged across her sleeve. When she smiled at a customer, it wasn't forced. It was tired, but kind. He looked away. Attachment was dangerous. He knew that. Still, something about the way she moved, unhurried, unafraid, made his chest tighten. He wondered, briefly, how many days she had left. Then he hated himself for thinking like that. He found a place to stay by nightfall. A narrow room above a tavern. The floorboards uneven, the window cracked but intact. He paid in coins he didn't remember earning, currency he had learned to carry without question. The room was quiet. Too quiet. That was always when it started. He sat on the bed and stayed at his hands as they trembled, just slightly. His breathing slowed, then stuttered. The ache behind his eye sharpened, blooming like a bruise pressed too hard. He whispered the count aloud. 18. 2 days left to leave a mark. 2 days left before the pressure built to something wise. 2 days before time remembered him. He lay back and closed his eyes. Images bled through the darkness, faces overlapping, voices speaking in languages he half remembered. A man in robes, a child holding a notebook, a city of glass and light that didn't exist yet. He turned his head and swallowed. This was the price of staying too long. Somewhere below, laughter erupted. A mug shattered. Life continued, unaware that it was on a clock that did not include him. He wondered, not for the first time, if this place would forget him quickly. Most did. By the morning, he would begin looking for someone worth leaving something with. A question, a pattern, a fragment that might survive after he was gone. By the 20th day, none of it would matter. The air would tighten, the pain would spike, and the world would fold. It always did. By the 3rd morning, the city had decided what he was. Not important, not dangerous, not memorable. That was always how it began. He learned the rhythm of the place quickly. Where people gathered, where they didn't. Which streets felt older than the rest, heavy with stories that had nowhere to go. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he chose his words carefully, as if language itself might report him. Every place had a pattern. He learned to read them because he had to. By midday, he was sitting near a fountain in the central square, watching the water repeat the same motion again and again. A child leaned over the edge, laughing as her fingers disturbed the surface. He flinched when her mother pulled her back. Not because of the movement, because for a moment, the girl had looked directly at him. Truly at him. The feeling passed. The child turned away. The mother never noticed. He exhaled slowly. It wasn't that people couldn't see him. It was that time encouraged them not to. He had tested this once. Long ago, he had stayed still in the middle of a crowded street, refusing to move, refusing to blend in. By the end of the day, people had begun walking through him. Not physically, but mentally. Their eyes slid off his face. Their minds rejected the inconvenience of his presence. Time didn't erase him. It edited him out. He rose from the fountain and walked toward the outskirts of the square, where the noise softened. He stopped at a small workshop, with shavings curled on the ground like pale ribbons. Inside, an old man carved slowly, methodically, his hands steady despite the tremor in his shoulders. The man looked up. "You're not from here," he said. The traveler froze. It was Ray. Uncomfortable. "I suppose not," he replied. The old man studied him for a long moment. There was no suspicion in his eyes, only curiosity, the kind that hadn't yet learned to be afraid. "You look like someone waiting," the man said finally. "For what?" The old man shrugged. "For something to catch up." The traveler said nothing. That night, he wrote. He always wrote. Sometimes it was numbers, sequences that felt right but meant nothing on their own. Sometimes symbols. Sometimes questions, half-formed and dangerous. This time, he carved a small mark into the beam beneath his bed. Simple, easy to miss. A spiral, interrupted at the 20th line. He didn't know who would see it, or when, but someone always did. By the 5th day, his headaches worsened. Sounds layered over one another, footsteps from different directions that didn't align. He would reach for an object and feel the echo of touching it before his fingers made contact. His body was slipping out of sync. He began to avoid mirrors. By the 7th day, people stopped remembering his name. Not that he had given them the real one. He watched it happen, the way conversations restarted themselves when he entered a room, the way eyes flickered, uncertain, before settling elsewhere. The woman from the bread stall passed him once without recognition. She walked right by, her basket lighter now, her expression unchanged. Something hollowed inside him. He told himself it didn't matter. It never mattered. By the 10th day, he stopped trying to be known. He stopped telling stories, stopped asking questions. He moved like a shadow with weight, careful not to disturb the shape of things. When he left marks now, they were subtle, hidden in margins, scratched into places only the curious would notice. Time punished attention. It rewarded patience. On the 14th night, the pain returned with a vengeance. He woke gasping, fingers clawing at the sheets as if they might anchor him. Voices crowded his thoughts, languages layered over one another, arguing, pleading, calculating. He bit down hard enough to draw blood. This was how it always accelerated. By the 18th day, he was already preparing to leave. He burned what could burn, hid what could survive. He stood at the window and watched the city breathe, knowing that soon it would breathe without him. There was a strange mercy in that. On the morning of the 19th day, the old man from the workshop pressed a small wooden object into his hand. "I don't know why," the man said, embarrassed. "I just thought you might need it." The traveler looked down. It was a compass. Old, handmade. The needle stuck, refusing to point north. He felt something shift in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. The old man nodded, already forgetting why the conversation mattered. By nightfall, the traveler counted his breaths. 19. Tomorrow, the world would fold again. And somewhere else, another place would pretend he had never been. The pain never arrived all at once. That was the cruel part. It began as pressure behind his eyes, subtle, almost polite, like a thought he wasn't meant to finish. He ignored it the way sailors ignored the slow tilt of the horizon. By the 15th day, it had weight. By the 17th, warning. On the night before the 20th, it became unavoidable. He woke on the floor. He didn't remember falling. The room bent at impossible angles, walls breathing out of rhythm, struggling to agree on their own shape. When he tried to stand, his legs refused. Not weak, just uncertain, as if gravity itself hadn't decided where he belonged. He laughed once. It came out wrong. This was how time corrected him. He crawled to the window and pressed his forehead against the glass. Outside, the city slept peacefully, unaware that one of its smallest disturbances was coming apart above a tavern. When he closed his eyes, memories collided. Not his own. A man shouting in a language he hadn't learned yet. A woman crying over a body that wasn't dead in any timeline he remembered. A child carving symbols into dirt he would one day carve into wood. Time wasn't linear. It was crowded. He had stayed past the limit once. Only once. On the 21st day, his shadow moved before he did. On the 22nd, his reflection stopped matching his face. On the 23rd, he forgot his own name. That was when the tearing began. Not physical, but complete. Time did not allow that mistake again. Now, it enforced the limit mercilessly. By dawn, blood traced a thin line from his nose to his lips. Almost, he whispered, unsure who he was trying to convince. He packed quickly, left the compass on the table. The spiral beneath the bed remained. Fragments. That was all he was allowed. As the sun rose, the air thickened. The room hummed, low, wrong, vibrating through bone and breath. He sat on the edge of the bed and counted. 19 breaths. On the 20th, the world stuttered. Dust froze midi. Sound stretched thin and metallic. Then the pain arrived, sharp, absolute, as the room folded inward like paper crushed in a fist. He screamed. No one heard. And then, silence. Cold stone beneath his hands. Damp air. The distant echo of waves against something ancient. He opened his eyes. Different sky. Different stars. Different century. The count had begun again. He closed his eyes as numbness settled. And for the first time, a thought terrified him more than the pain. What if time wasn't testing him? This time, he landed somewhere quiet. No crowds, no bells, no voices bending around unfamiliar words. Just wind in tall grass, and the tired creak of an old wooden structure holding itself together. He stayed where he was, knees drawn close, letting the timeline settle. The headaches softened. The echoes thinned, like fog lifting. This place was kind. That was rare. In the stillness, the memories returned. Not forced, but invited. He was 7 when his parents didn't come home. They always returned before dark. His grandmother made him finish his homework anyway. Her voice calm, her hands betraying her only when she thought he wasn't watching. Night fell. Morning came. Nothing changed. There were searches. Gentle questions. Official faces that learned too quickly how to say we don't know. No bodies. No evidence. No ending anyone could accept. They hadn't died. They had simply vanished. His grandmother never said it aloud, but she never erased them either. Their coats stayed by the door. Their cups remained on the shelf. Lost, untreated, left to coexist. She raised him on patience and unanswered questions. She lived long enough to see him grow restless. When she died, quietly, in her sleep, the world narrowed. He was the only one left who remembered his parents as real. That was when the obsession began. Not with changing the past, with witnessing it. Years of study, of failure, of building things that almost worked. He wasn't chasing miracles. He just wanted to see them once more. The machine activated without spectacle. No light, no warning. Just a sound, like something enormous inhaling. And then the floor was gone. He didn't arrive in the past. He fell out of time. Now, lying in the grass beneath an unfamiliar sky, the truth settled gently. He hadn't been chosen, or punished. He had missed. Missed the moment. Missed the anchor. Missed the rules that kept everyone else in place. Time didn't know where to put him. The thought didn't break him. It explained him. A loose thread in a closed weave. He laughed softly. His parents were still lost. And in trying to find them, he was becoming lost himself. As clouds drifted overhead, another thought surfaced. Quieter, more dangerous. If time could scatter him this completely, then it might have scattered answers too. He remembered the room exactly as it had been. A basement carved out of concrete and patience. Walls layered with chalked equations, erased and rewritten until the surface itself looked tired. Wires crossed the floor like veins, feeding into a frame that had never been meant to last. The machine wasn't beautiful. It was necessary. He'd built it with one rule. Do not interfere. No coordinates. No controls to change history. Just observation. A window anchored to the signatures his parents had left behind. Patterns no one else believed mattered. He told himself that once he saw the truth, he would stop. The night he activated it, the air felt dense. Expectant. His hand hovered over the switch longer than it should have. Not fear. Reverence. When the machine powered on, the sound wasn't mechanical. It was deep, a vibration felt in bone. Not air. Chalk dust lifted from the walls, hanging in spirals that mirrored equations he hadn't written yet. That was when he understood. Time wasn't opening. It was reacting. His parents' disappearance wasn't an event. It was a fracture. Before he could shut the machine down, the room folded gently, like a book closing around him. The chalkboard rewrote itself as the rules he'd trusted rearranged. Then nothing. When he woke, there was no machine, no basement, just a sky that didn't belong to him. It took weeks, jumps, to understand. He hadn't traveled through time. He had detached from it. Time hadn't expelled him. It couldn't. So it compromised. It let him exist where the strain was lowest. Quiet eras. Small moments. Places history wouldn't miss. 20 days at a time. His parents hadn't vanished. They had reached the fracture first. Or worse, they had created it. The truth hollowed him. He wasn't chasing a mystery anymore. He was following a trail of damage his own blood had left behind. And for the first time, his purpose shifted. If he couldn't go back, then he would learn the system that caught him. Learn it well enough to stop falling. Or if that failed, well enough to choose where he would land last. The thought terrified him, but it didn't feel like desperation. It felt like a plan. He stopped trying to solve it alone. That was the breakthrough. Over many jumps, in places history barely remembered, he saw the same thing repeat. Curiosity, fragile, stubborn, unchanged by era. So he stopped leaving fragments. He began leaving questions. In a monastery, he hit a spiral among prayers, interrupted at the 20th turn, with a single line beneath it. What resists being observed? In a port city centuries later, he carved a sequence beneath a dock beam, irregular enough that only the bored or brilliant would notice. In a near-future lab, he nudged nothing but a margin note. Time is not linear. It is conditional. He stayed just long enough. People did the rest. A monk copied the spiral for a lifetime. A scientist dismissed it, until her equations failed without it. A programmer followed an anomaly no one else cared about. They never met, but their thoughts converged. From the edges of time, the traveler watched hope take shape. Humanity didn't need instructions. It needed permission. Across centuries, the same truth emerged in different languages. Time wasn't a river. It was a mesh. Stable where untouched. Flexible where stressed. Dangerous where fractured. And he was what happened when something slipped through. The idea of stability formed slowly, anchoring consciousness to a single thread, sacrificing movement for coherence. The cost was always the same. To stop drifting, one had to choose. He understood that long before it was proven. Too many lives half-lived. Too many faces blending together. Except one. The town was unremarkable. A bend in a river. A place history would never argue over. He arrived exhausted, expecting nothing. Instead, he found stillness. Nights without pain. Mornings that felt aligned, as if time tolerated him here. And eventually, he found her. Not as an interruption. As a constant. When she spoke to him, truly spoke, something inside him settled. Not desire. Recognition. He still didn't have the solution. But he had found the place where choosing might finally be possible. And humanity, unknowingly, had given him the last truth he needed. Stability was not something time granted. It was something you accepted, knowing exactly what you would lose. The town did not announce itself as important. That was why it worked. It rested beside a river that bent gently, never flooding, never drying out. The houses were modest, built to endure, not to impress. History passed nearby, loud and destructive, but it never lingered long enough to scar this place. Time moved carefully here, as if it had learned restraint. He stayed longer than he meant to. Not because the symptoms vanished. They didn't, but because they softened. The headaches arrived later. The echoes grew faint. When he slept, his dreams were finally his. And then there was her. She ran a small workshop near the water, repairing things people no longer bothered to replace. Chairs, clocks, lanterns that only needed patience, not progress. He watched her before he spoke to her. Not secretly, just slowly, the way you look at something you're afraid to name. She noticed him anyway. "You're new," she said one afternoon, still focused on the mechanism in her hands. "Yes, you won't be for long." He laughed, unsure whether he felt relieved or exposed. "What makes you say that?" She met his eyes. People who belong somewhere don't walk like they're listening for an exit. She never asked him to explain. They spoke in fragments at first. Small truths. Harmless lies. He said he traveled. She said she stayed. Neither pretended it was temporary. Days passed. He helped when his hands were steady. Watched the river change color with the sky. Learned the sound of her footsteps without realizing he was memorizing them. On the 17th day, the pain returned sharply. She found him by the river, hands clenched, breath shallow. "Is it always like this?" she asked. He nodded. "And you never stay?" "No." She sat beside him anyway. "If you're going to disappear," she said softly, "let this be real while it is." That night, he told her the truth. Not the machine or the fractures, just the part that mattered. "I don't belong to the time I arrive in." She took his trembling hand as if it were ordinary. "Then stay as long as you can." The idea terrified him, because now, staying meant losing something. On the 19th day, he didn't pack. He walked the town with her, burning it into memory. Every sound, every shadow, every unremarkable miracle of a life untouched by agency. That night, as the pressure thickened the air, he chose. He used what centuries had built. He anchored himself, not to the past, not to the future, but to here. The pain was immediate, brutal. Possibility collapsed inward. Timelines fell away like discarded roads. When it stopped, he was still there, breathing, bleeding, alive. She held him, whispering his name, the real one, pinning him to a moment that refused to let go. For the first time since the machine, the count did not begin again. History did not record the moment he stayed. There was no thunder, no rupture, no mark in the sky. Time accepted the compromise quietly. In the years that followed, the town remained what it had always been. Small, overlooked, stubbornly ordinary. The river bent the same way. The houses aged gracefully. The world changed elsewhere. He changed too. The pain faded, slowly. Never entirely, but enough to become manageable. The echoes stopped. His memories arranged themselves into something linear again, no longer fighting for dominance. He aged. That surprised him. Every wrinkle felt like a victory. Every year that passed without tearing him away felt earned. He worked beside her, fixing what others discarded. He learned to wake without counting days, to plan weeks ahead without fear, to speak of the future as something he would actually reach. At night, when the world was quiet, he sometimes told her stories. Not about the jumps. About people. A monk who copied a symbol until it changed him. A scientist who chased an imbalance no one else believed mattered. A programmer who followed a question so old it felt like memory. She listened, smiling, never asking how he knew. Somewhere far away, and far later, people wrote about him. Not clearly. There were records of a man who appeared briefly across centuries, leaving behind ideas that arrived before their time. Notes that didn't fit. Symbols that reappeared too often to be coincidence. They argued about him. Some said myth. Some said misattribution. Some said proof of something unfinished. They never found his body, because he never left it behind. The last mention of him was small, easy to miss. A footnote in a forgotten journal, written by someone who had followed the spirals far enough to understand what they meant. It read, "The anomaly did not seek to escape time. It sought to belong to it. And when it chose, the system stabilized. In the town by the river, he grew old. When he died, it was peacefully, quietly, in a bed he had slept in for decades, with her hand in his, time moving forward without resistance. No jump followed, no light, just the ordinary miracle of an ending that stayed where it was. And somewhere, across history, time finally closed the fracture it had carried for so long. Not because it was forced to, but because someone stopped running.